Joining me now is motoring journalist, the legend Quentin Willson, and journalist and author of Not Zero, Ross Clark. Let's start with you, Quentin. So we're constantly nudged towards getting electric vehicles, but the fact of the matter is there's not a great deal of enthusiasm, it would seem. The inquiries are 66% down into them. Just how green are electric cars anyway?
Well, I think you just need to understand that the best-selling car in the world, not just an electric car, is a Tesla Model Y. So there is huge demand out there. When we're talking about green, the amount of critical minerals you need to produce for a battery every year is about 20 million tons extracted. Compared to fossil fuels, 4 billion tons of extraction, the whole life of an electric car, the emissions are kind of 70% less than a combustion car. So we need to look at this information we're being presented with by, let's be clear, a biased editorial policy against electric cars, and look at the facts really, really carefully, because you go through these things and the information there just isn't accurate.
OK, Ross Clark, let's cut to you now, because earlier this year, Rowan Atkinson said he felt duped into buying an electric car when he looked into the true environmental impact of the extraction of the ore for the batteries, the fabrication of electric cars. The environmental impact is not just measuring what comes out the exhaust or what doesn't, it's the actual full creation of the car. Ross, tell us about the environmental impact of electric cars compared to more ordinary cars, please.
Yeah, I mean, obviously where electric cars score is that they don't have exhaust pipes, they don't spew out noxious fumes where they actually use. But there's two things, sources of carbon emissions from electric cars. Firstly, the electricity. They're only as green as the electricity that is used to produce them, and 40% of our electricity in Britain is still produced with fossil fuels, mostly gas. And while the government wants to try to remove that fossil fuel by 2035, it's a very big uphill struggle, because it cannot tell us how it's going to cope with, a situation where the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing, and we've got very little wind and solar energy. It is going to be very, very expensive to decarbonise the national grid. So, it's likely way beyond 2035 that we'll still be having electricity from fossil fuels, and that will obviously impact on the environmental friendliness of electric vehicles. But the other problem is, as Quentin did allude to there, is in the manufacture of electric cars, and due to the nature of the batteries requiring these extra rare metals, it takes an extra sort of 40-50% carbon emissions involved in the manufacture of an electric car compared with the equivalent petrol and diesel car. So, you start on the back foot, as it were. You're going to have to drive a certain number of miles before you can claim that you've cut carbon emissions, and that distance can be anywhere between sort of 10,000 miles and 80,000 miles, according to various estimates, and where you're recharging and so on. So,
OK, I'm going to bring... Can I bring...
electric... When you drive 50,000 miles in it, quite likely you're actually going to be, creating more carbon emissions over the lifetime of that.
OK, thank you, Quentin. I'd like to bring you back in here, because, of course, we saw there was an upset in Uxbridge over ULEZ. When it's put to people, if they get the chance to vote on things, or, of course, they turn their back on them. Today, the Prime Minister is being urged to turn his back on eco-policies, including the outright ban on petrol cars by 2030. Do you think we need a little bit more carrot and a little bit less stick on changing to EVs?
Let's just go back to your point, Ross, about the carbon debt. It's 16,500 miles on a European grid, and it pays off very, very quickly. And it's much, much, much less than a combustion car. And going on to your political point, the newspaper you held up, I mean, they did a story about potholes and EVs causing potholes, and cited research by Leeds University. Leeds University have said, hang on a minute, we weren't involved in this. You just lifted some research and made it look like we were. Can we have a retraction? So, look, we're seeing the media trying to influence government political policy on this. And it's really, really wrong that we're being deluged with misinformation that is trying to get politicians to change the direction of travel. And look, Europe is burning. And we've just had a story on your programme about the price of fuel being ratcheted up by opportunistic fuel retailers. And you're telling me we're to carry on doing what we've always done and burning what we've always burned. We have to change. And I know politicians are going to make EVs and net zero and ULEZ an electoral issue. But there's a huge body of people out there who are worried about air quality, who are worried about climate, and who are worried about the rising costs of energy, which have been weaponized by Russia and Saudi Arabia.
OK, Ross, I'm going to have to stop there. Ross Clark, Quentin Willson, we could talk all day about this, but we have to wrap there. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on GB News Saturday this afternoon. Thank you very much. You're watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Martin Daubney, Loads Morecambe, and